All right, hi everyone. Welcome back to another session of 8X Pixel 360 Virtual Expo and wishing all of you a very happy Wildlife Day. So I'm extremely excited for today's session titled Of Ghost and Gear. We're joined by the charming David Strike together with Paul Strike, the co-founder of innovative scuba manufacturer Fourth Element. So before we begin, let me just quickly introduce both our guests. David Strike is a former instructor, trainer, and certifier with a background in military, commercial, recreational, and technical diving. David has authored several hundred dive-related articles. He is the 8X Ambassador for Technical Diving, the recipient of the 8X Lifetime Achievement Award, and a Fellow of the Explorers Club of New York. The second gentleman, Paul Strike, is the co-founder and managing director of Fourth Element. A former speaker at the UN's 2017 Ocean Conference, Paul is passionate advocate for greater ocean protection and conservation and has played a prominent role in the Global GhostNet Gear Initiative. So that's enough from me, and I will pass it over to David to begin this exciting session. The floor is yours, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushi, for that charming introduction.
Yes.
Bless you. Good evening, Paul. It's lovely to meet you at long last. It's after sort of communicating with you for a number of years through emails. I don't think we've ever actually spoken or met live or even virtually live. So welcome.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, it's great to meet you virtually at last. And as you say, yeah, we've communicated over the years, but this is the first actual, close to meeting that we've actually got to, isn't it? Even, having not been to Oztech or anything. So
no,
yeah, it's great.
But hopefully we'll see you live fairly soon anyway.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the benefit of the viewer, Paul and I were chatting beforehand. Paul, I'm going to ask you to tell us where you live, where you come from.
Well, I live now in the area that I actually grew up in, although lived away for quite some time. And we're in the southwest corner of England, Cornwall. It's a little bit of land that sticks out into the Atlantic and the entrance to the English Channel, and is pretty much surrounded by water, apart from the little bit that attaches us to the rest of the country. So yeah, we are right out on a limb. We're as far south as you can get in England, from mainland England, and we're lucky to have wonderful coastline, beaches and cliffs, and multiple dive sites all around us. Really, it's a very, very beautiful part of the country.
And you come from a little fishing village, Porthleven.
That's right. Yeah, just down the road from where our offices are now, about 4 miles away. Yeah, Porthleven, a fishing village that, in its heyday would have had hundreds of fishing boats going out, by sail to net pilchards and sardines and things like that, and the shellfish industry. It's not that busy now. Those days have gone, but it's a charming little harbour still, and that is where I grew up and spent many happy hours messing about in boats and catching fish and snorkeling and diving, and basically having a wonderful childhood growing up next to the ocean, basically.
And it's we were talking earlier. It's full of strikes, isn't it, down there?
Yes. Yeah. Most of the strikes in the area live in Porthleven. It's a somewhat closely knit community. I think it's almost intimidating for some people coming into the village when there's strike the funeral directors, strike the builders, strike the fishmonger, strike the fishing tackle retailer. There was the sort of Porthleven mafia. So
I was telling Paul just before we came live, many years ago I was based at Culrose, the Royal Naval Air Station down there, doing a course, and I had to visit the dentist at one stage, and the dental assistant said, yes, you come from Porthleven, don't you? So he had to point out where it was on a map, which was just down the road. But
yeah, it's my mum actually started tracing family tree back on the strike side, and she got back to 17 something, 17, early 17s, and a Samuel strike, which kind of in effect was the root of all of the strikes that I know around Cornwall. Maybe even you, David, you never know. And he came from a village literally about 2 miles away from Porthleven. So that's how far the family name has moved. So Samuel Strike back in 1700 was living about 3 miles away from where I grew up.
I know this is sort of getting off the subject, but years ago I thought I'll go to the library, the Macquarie Library, and just look up the surname, where it came from. And it was some sort of obscure thing. Apparently, when the Norman conquest, as a reward for good and loyal service, sort of senior ratings were awarded different jobs. And one of them was dishing out corn to the peasants. And he was called the Strike. And I thought, how very apt that is. But anyway, enough of that. Paul, so growing up, how did you get into, you went diving before you were actually sort of certified to go diving, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah, I mean, I think I was always destined to have spend a lot of time underwater, as that was where how I started swimming first. I could quite happily swim around in the rock pools underwater before I could manage to stay on top of the water. And I did that for weeks, I think, before I actually, managed to master, or at least, keep my head above the water. And yeah, I say growing up by the coast, then, lots of snorkeling as a youngster, messing about in the pools and the sea. And then, yeah, I mean, when was that? In the 70s, I had a friend basically who, an adult friend who came to stay. My mum had a guest house, and he had all this diving kit, and he just said, "Do you want to have a go?" So I was like, "Yeah, of course, great." And I went diving with him. Obviously, he didn't leave me on my own as such, but he basically, the instruction was, it was a pretty short and truncated PADI open water course. It was his instruction was, breathe out when you come up and don't stay down too long, and that was it. And off we went, and we sort of dived off the beach at Porthleven, which has got lovely little rocky reefs and things, and around the harbour. And so I did a fair bit of diving when I was a young teenager or early teenage, with this guy. And yeah, what I was saying, it wasn't until much later that I actually became qualified. But
it sounds like the perfect sort of course anyway. You've got all the basic sort of instructions there. Yeah, don't exactly. Hold your breath and don't stay down too long. Yeah,
yeah, and obviously it was very shallow, and it was very, it probably wasn't quite as horribly risky as it sounds. And as growing up in the sea, I was more than relaxed. It was totally, there's no stress associated with being underwater as such.
There'd be some terrific diving around that area of the coast, though, wouldn't there?
Oh yeah, it's what's wonderful about Cornwall is that there's always a shelter spot somewhere, because of the coastline is so it's a multi-directional, you might say. You got headlands and coves, and you got the south coast, and the north coast is only 40 minutes away from the south coast, right. Actually near the tip where we are. So there's always somewhere where you can get in. A lot of lovely kind of reefs, and of course wrecks, particularly in places like Falmouth Bay, where there's a little bit more protection from the breakers, because although there are countless wrecks, I mean thousands and thousands of wrecks, so many of them are completely broken up because they're in exposed locations, and of course they get absolutely slammed with the breakers and this in the sea.
Yeah.
So although there's masses of wrecks as such, there's not so many wreck sites, but there's still plenty of them. I mean, what I'm saying is there's a lot of diving. There's a few cannons around. There's plenty of cannonballs around. Yeah, there's a train, I think, on the north coast. So there's some interesting things.
Oh, lovely. And so, growing up, you then went to university.
Yeah, yeah. Went to Exeter University and studied sports science, primarily to go into education, which I did. And yeah, when I was at university, I played a lot of sport, played a lot of rugby, and then would come back to Cornwall in the summer, and again do a bit of diving, bit of snorkeling, generally water sports stuff. Stay at our family home, and so yeah, it was pretty good.
You played for Cornwall, you were saying.
Yeah.
You played rugby for Cornwall.
Yeah. Rugby was a big deal in my life for quite a long time. It was my major recreation, my major focus.
Yeah.
And I was very proud to play for Cornwall. As this area, as you probably know, there's loads and loads of rugby clubs in a relatively small area, small population. It's a bit like South Wales, it's a passionate sort of hotbed of rugby, and so yeah, there's a lot of spirit, a lot of it was a big deal basically to play for Cornwall.
Right.
And you would go over to Redruth, which is one of the county grounds, and if you were playing there against opposition that came to Cornwall, they were a fairly uncompromising crowd. They were quite a very loyal, and would make that known, sort of verbally to any other supporters. It was quite an experience.
Right. So what happened when you left university? Where did you go? Did you take up teaching or?
Yeah, went from university into teaching, a little further east, in Somerset area actually, for a short time, continuing to play rugby, of course, and so on. And then I went probably a couple of years after university, went and took a position at an independent school just north of London called Haileybury and Imperial Service College, which was quite a significant independent school. Had a great sporting tradition and a great rugby tradition, and so I went there to teach sport, and at the same time play rugby for one of the sort of senior London clubs called Saracens, and they it was in the days of it being non-professional, so I was basically like everybody else at that time, doing your day job,
right,
and then training in the evenings, playing matches at the weekend. And as that progressed, obviously the standard was in effect going up and up, and the requirement was going up, the time commitment. And I think that was I finished playing just before it went to a professional game, because it was becoming like a full-time job in itself, what was expected. But absolutely great fun. Loved those years of playing.
Where did you play? Sorry, what was their home ground, the Saracens?
They had a ground in North London, not that far from Cockfosters. It was called Southgate. Southgate was their actual ground, and they weren't a wealthy London club. There was some wealthier clubs with bigger, fancier, sort of pitches and so on. But there was something quite lovely about that. It was very down to earth, very, kind of grassroots, if that's the right word, kind of rugby, where it was you just played the game, enjoyed it, loved it. You weren't getting any great benefits other than the enjoyment of playing rugby.
Yeah. And you were still teaching at, obviously during the week you would be teaching at Haileybury.
That's right. Yeah, it was a full-on teaching week because of being an independent school. It was
that's quite a. I actually looked it up, and apparently it's very highly regarded school, isn't it? I think it sort of ranks alongside Eton and Harrow as having the most VC winners, Victoria Cross winners.
Yeah. It was a very very significant school. It was not as old as either of the other schools you just mentioned, but it was, and the buildings were built originally for the East India Company.
Right.
which is obviously a massive trading company, very wealthy. They built a fabulous training college for their officers or senior staff that would go out to run the company in various parts of the world. So I think no expense was spared on this building. So very elaborate, very grand, but it was much later to become a school than the likes of Eton and Harrow and things like that. But so when the East India Company ended, the school, the buildings were then made available as a school, and as you say, it achieved significant recognition as a very significant independent school for educating the very fortunate.
So how did you get back then into diving?
Well, I say, as I was saying, rugby was the big deal and took up almost all my time. But then towards the end of those times, I had the opportunity to come to Australia, go to Australia, and spend a summer traveling, the East Coast from. I think we went north from Port Douglas up to, trying to remember the name. Cape Tribulation, is that the kind of area right at the north of Queensland?
Cape York.
And we travelled all the way down the coast to Brisbane, and I thought, right, well, ever since a kid, watching the Jacques Cousteau, TV programs and so on, I'd always wanted to dive on the Barrier Reef, and obviously I thought, well, I can't rock up and say I've done quite a few dives, but I've got no qualification. So that's what spurred me to become qualified, and so I signed up with a dive centre in North London, completed my PADI open water course. We did the qualifying dives at Swanage on the south coast of England. Murky, not the, Swanage has got some, I shouldn't say anything wrong about Swanage, it's got some great diving there, but when you're just doing your qualifying dives under the pier, it's not necessarily the most amazing, environment. But so I qualified there, and my next dive after that was on the Barrier Reef off of Port Douglas.
A world of difference.
Just a bit. Yeah. It was a little bit clearer. Yeah.
And warmer.
Yes. Yeah. Everything. And a bit more wildlife, to be honest. I mean, there's, you got quite excited watching a few hermit crabs running around under Swanage Pier, and the occasional squid. And of course, you drop into the Barrier Reef, and it's just like, oh gosh, amazing amount of marine life. And so that got me back into scuba. And it was, and also that sort of time, then I would perhaps pop over to Sharm el Sheikh or Hurghada in the Red Sea for a week's holiday, do some diving, and that was another great environment to go.
What you had an injury in rugby, so that sort of put paid to your rugby career, which I guess was a blessing from the diving point of view.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't quite ready to give up my rugby, but had to. As you say, I had a fairly bad knee injury, which meant that I couldn't play. I tried playing again after some rehabilitation of my knee, and it was proving to be not possible. And unfortunately, I managed to have my knee bend it the way that it was never designed to bend, and tore the ligaments pretty extensively. And even though I had some surgery, with at the time, sort of state of the art kind of technique to try and use, I think it was mainly your patella tendon that they would slice a piece out of and try and stick it in to take the place of your cruciate ligaments. But it didn't work. And consequently, my knee was very, very unstable. And so when I did try and play afterwards, a relative tap, it would I could feel it moving. And I just thought, this is probably if I carry on like this, I'm probably going to, have real problems walking much sooner in life than I want to. So I just thought it's time to hang up the boots, shall we
Yeah.
say. And but the advantage then, of course, I had more time to devote to things like diving, and that's definitely enabled me to get back into that in a much bigger way. And yeah.
And you went through for instructor rating, you BZAC and PADI?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we had a huge swimming pool at the school that I was teaching at.
Right.
And there had been in the past, there had been a member of staff who ran a dive club. And so I kind of energized that at the school. And being, I suppose, a sports teacher, it wasn't difficult to kind of translate a little bit of introduction to scuba. Again, dreadful because this is before I was an instructor, but it was an independent school. You had kind of the slightly different rules, you might say, although I'm sure not from Paddy's perspective, but so hopefully they're not listening. And
they will be tomorrow.
They will be. But yeah, it became clear that I needed to become an instructor, and so I spent a summer in Weymouth becoming a BSAC instructor, basically.
Right.
And that enabled me then to introduce the students at the school to scuba in the school pool. We had a system where they have the Combined Cadet Force, the CCF. That was quite a strong activity at the school. They could choose that or the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme or charity services, but ran alongside one of these kind of activities. And then we tried to provide a really interesting and varied program for the first year intake in the CCF. Part of that was a 3-week, or it was only 3 afternoons, so 3 afternoons over 3 weeks, intro to scuba by me in the school pool. And from that really then spurred on a number of the students would get qualified as, not through me, but with a PADI dive centre nearby. We had a good relationship with them, and we would arrange, to run courses and so on. And so we had, we developed quite a strong scuba club, taking, them to places like Lanzarote and Swanage and Portland and exotic places like that. But it was great. It was a really, really vibrant, and we had a lot of the students, kind of became qualified. And I then used to arrange a week holiday in Sharm el Sheikh for
that's the Red Sea.
The Red Sea.
Yeah.
The Red Sea. That was like a school trip near the end of the summer term for those people who had finished their GCSE exams and almost had like time to kill. They were at the boarding school. They'd finished their examinations as such. Very rarely did they go back to their homes. I mean, probably because their parents thought, well, we've paid up until July, so stay there. But yeah, so I'd arrange these learn to dive trips basically to Sharm el Sheikh. I used the Red Sea College, which was a fantastic training school there in Sharm, and yeah, take a group out there. They would do their learn to dive course in the Red Sea, which was obviously wonderful. Do the qualifying dives towards the end of the week off a hard boat, diving on reefs that completely blew their minds really, because it was like this fabulous marine life.
Yeah.
And so I did quite a few of these, and then
over a period of years, or
yes, over a period of years. It was
I
was probably 5, I guess 5 or 6.
Right.
And then of course this was in effect the catalyst for Fourth Element, I suppose, from the point of view that Jim Standing, as you know, my business partner and co-founder, he joined the school as a biology teacher. I got to know him quite quickly. He was also interested in basketball, and I used to run the basketball club at the school, so I was quite keen to get Jim involved in basketball. Some newer young blood, member of staff come in and take some of the training sessions, because I've been running it on my own for the last 10 years, and I kind of thought, hey, that'd be great, Jim. I got to get to know this guy. he's keen on basketball. I've got a nice little job for him. And so we got on really well. And it just turned out he was also, a scuba diver. And so he would help me on these various trips down to the south coast and so on. And then, of course, I said, do you fancy going to the Red Sea for a week at the end of the summer term? And of course, the answer to that is yes. And we did a couple of these, and I don't know if it was on the first or the second, I can't really remember, but certainly after having a day's diving, and we were, as you do, having a beer in the Camel Bar, as it was there in Sharm, and talking about, what a great day we'd had, basically, and then started talking a bit more about scuba diving in general and various things around that in terms of an industry and as a market and so on, and the people that scuba dive. And I had relatively recently completed my PADI instructor course. I put myself through that course after doing the BSAC one earlier. I think I was enjoying the learning and enjoying, taking that further just for the sake of it, really. I had done my IDC and everything in a quarry in Cambridgeshire in the UK in March, and it was really, really cold. I mean, the water was probably about 3 or 4 degrees. It was, mightily chilly. And I spent the entire time just freezing and just thinking, what is this all about? I'm kneeling on the little platforms, waiting to do the skills demos and all those kind of things that you do, obviously, on your instructor course, just shivering. And I thought I must have the wrong kit, because I at this point I've done quite a lot of outdoor activities, from kayaking, skiing, all sorts of stuff where there's the right kit to keep you warm. And so I'm thinking that I've got the wrong kit. Then I realized as this course goes on that everybody is just freezing cold, including the instructors and examiners who came across from North America and are obviously long-time dive professionals. And I thought, geez, even these guys, they're getting out of the water and are absolutely freezing and shivering. So this was a conversation I had with Jim, when we were in Egypt, and kind of thought, well, how come? Why isn't there, more effective thermal gear? Why, this is obviously affecting people's enjoyment of the sport. And so we just started talking around. So we had a exercise physiology kind of person in me, biology and zoology person in Jim, who had I think his dissertation was on some sort of mammalian adaptation to temperature or something like that in the marine environment. And so we were just talking about, the kind of technology, you might say, and the science behind how do we keep warmer in that dry suit environment. And then we started, thinking about the performance fabrics and so on and so forth. And that was the little catalyst that we thought, well, what kind of things would we make? And so at this point, we didn't think we were really going to, make a company or start a company. It was almost like that kind of classic, somewhat, naive thing that the product didn't exist, so we thought we'd make it ourselves. And it's, we kind of started researching and trying to work out what this undersuit would look like, what would it be made from. And then you had all these other things with the undersuits that were around at that time, where not just the fact that they perhaps weren't, the best at keeping you warm, but they didn't fit terribly well. It was like, if you were broader than you were tall as such, which was certainly in my case, you'd have the legs of your undersuit hanging off your feet because, you needed a extra large top, but you were not 6'4", you're 5'11". So those elastic straps that would sort of slip off your heel, and then you would ride up your leg so that your calf started getting really freezing cold. And there was all these various little things that we were kind of talking about and thinking, okay, how can we make something that's better than this? And say the same kind of conversation, Jim, Jim's quite a bit younger than me, and he said, there isn't really a feeling of lifestyle brand associated with diving, and he felt very much that there wasn't the Quicksilvers or the Billabongs that you have in the surf world, in the scuba diving world. And so there didn't seem to be a brand that embodied that kind of engagement and that kind of, involvement, with the sport. And, that basically, if you wore that brand, it was clear you were a diver. Not in terms of casual clothes and t-shirts and sweatshirts and all that kind of stuff. So this was this kind of conversation that then rumbled on for obviously months later, when we're both going off to basketball fixtures and we're talking about, this sort of idea about diving. And so, yeah, it was kind of just circumstantial, you might say, that we kind of were coincidence that we actually got to know, we actually met each other, coincidence that we were both interested in diving, and then kind of started, talking or having the opportunity to discuss these things. And then, the fact that we were involved at the same school meant we continued the conversation. Because I often think about how things could have been different and how things happened to.
It's still, I mean, that's a huge leap, though, to go from that sort of security of, or relative security, I guess, of teaching into manufacturing.
Yes, well, naivety is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And we once we got really excited about these things and started designing products, and I mean that was a whole well, I'll talk about steep learning curves, but yeah, as you say, we had no idea how to go about it, really. We just kind of worked it out as we went along, and we just, I suppose, it was a constant sort of run of little challenges and excitement and feeling like you'd made some little bits of progress just in getting some products together and designing t-shirts and getting some t-shirts printed and bringing all these things together, and then thinking about what do we call the company, and what does the brand look like, what does it mean, and many long evenings of discussing the brand name and the logo. And that was surprisingly hard. We come up with all sorts of things. We'd sleep on the name and overnight and just think, no, next day you go, no, that's not going to work. That's really, that's not a good sounding brand name at all. And it just kind of one day, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but the name, the fourth element came up, and the fourth element being water from an old sort of, elements and symbol point of view, and earth, air, fire, water. I mean, we thought this had some legs. We quite enjoyed this kind of quite fundamental approach to, the water as the fourth element, and so this kind of started to gel. I started doodling, the elements and the symbols. I actually did a little bit of just looking at, various old, ancient culture symbols for these things,
Right.
So you look at the hieroglyphs, and you look at Aztec kind of markings, and all of the cultures had very, very similar shapes and marks for these four elements. There was, great consistency. It didn't matter whether they were, different ends of the world, so to speak. And so this was the basis for the fourth element logo. So the earth being a solid block or line, the air is always like an open shape, an open kind of symbol. Obviously fire is always kind of those either little pointy, like triangles or wiggly lines, and water, obviously wavy lines or lots of little lines. And so I kind of merged these things together into this kind of, it kind of made sense across all of these different cultures, you might say, because they were fundamental shapes and symbols. And that was the formation of the logo. So,
So there you were armed with a logo, but you were both in Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
How did you wind up back in Helston?
Well, once we had made the decision to give up the day job, we did a little bit of moonlighting, just kind of trying to get an idea if the scuba industry was remotely interested in what we had to sell or show, or we had hardly anything at this point. And on the basis of I think it was a London dive show, where we thought, it was amazingly successful. We had, whatever that is, we sold quite a few t-shirts, and we seemed to have quite a positive reaction and interest in some of the technical things that hadn't yet come, we hadn't got ready to sell yet. but there was interest in them. And on the basis of that, we both gave up, as you say, incredibly secure, very well paid teaching jobs, which also provided accommodation for us. You know, we were in a boarding school in Hertfordshire, and the majority of the staff would live in school-owned accommodation. So I had a young family, 2 children under the age of 5 and a wife, and we were living in a school house, and Jim was in a schoolhouse, and we knew that if we gave in our, you know, once we gave up the job, we gave up the houses as well. So you know, obviously I explained this to my wife knew exactly what the situation was, and you know, I always give her absolutely huge credit for the fact that she, you know, was supportive and basically stood by me completely in the respect that she said, right, you know, if we're going to do this, let's do it, and we won't say, you know, we shouldn't have done that or anything. Let's go forwards. You know, we're going to leave a very secure job, move somewhere else, as it was then it was going to be Cornwall, but you know, and start up a company, you know, which may or may not, you know, have any kind of future. And yeah, an amazing woman said, yeah, you know, let's just do it, and you know, not ever say we shouldn't have done. You know, it was that kind of, you know, you probably regret not doing something more than the.
How did you? Because a lot of Fourth Element product is you're into recycling and really sort of protecting the oceans. Was that always a strong?
Well, it was. I'm not sure exactly why, other than I suppose, you know, both of us had an appreciation of marine life, and both of us perhaps, you know, I suppose like a lot of divers, you know, you are very aware of the marine environment and the fragility of it, really. We in the early 2000s, some of the materials that we were using, there were sometimes potential options with a recycled content, and we tested these recycled fabrics at that time, but it was very limited as to what was available, and frankly it was right at the early stages, and it hadn't been quite, they weren't achieving the performance of the fabrics that we were using. So we had a little look at it, and we were interested in using recycled fabrics right back in, you know, the early 2000s, but chose not to on the basis of performance. So, but that was always there in our, you know, in our minds. And as we, you know, as now, you know, as the business started to develop, and I'd go, mostly me would go to shows that were showing, you know, new developments in fabrics and technology and materials and all sorts of stuff. And then you're starting to learn more about what's possible, and you know, there was a huge drive towards, you know, using or creating recycled fabrics, and you get obviously involved in that, and you know, interested in the technology, and basically keeping an eye open for when the technology is achieving the performance that we required as a, in effect, you know, high performance, you know, clothing brand. So that just grew, and we would try stuff as and when, you know, to try and keep abreast of this technology. But it was the thing that really spurred us on to our first really sort of recycled range was swimwear and rash guards, but predominantly the swimwear. And we were aware, when it would have been in the about 2013, 14, that kind of era, all these things came together almost simultaneously, or over a relatively short period of time. We were being asked to sponsor or to help with the removal of fishing nets with a dive club based in LA, and they were going out on, you know, to sea at the weekend and removing nets from some of the reefs and wrecks around that area. And we were being asked to, you know, whether we could do something to fundraise or provide some free kit, because this was a, you know, a great activity. And we then kind of worked out, well, what are you doing with these nets? And then we understood that there was an element, or some of the nets could be recycled, and it was being recycled into something that was being used in jeans, some denim jeans. So with more research, we kind of found out about, who was doing the, the recycling of the net, what were the things around that, what were the options around that. And we then, I'd say obviously identified the source for recycled nylon yarn, which we could then request or ask some of our knitters, some of the mills that we worked with, to use in knitting the fabric that we wanted to use. And that was a bit more of a process. There's licensing agreements, there's all sorts of things associated with that. You can't always just get any yarn that you want. You need to have some agreement with the manufacturers of the yarn, because there's a brand name that they want to protect, and they want to ensure that the yarn is used in the way that it was intended, and it was going to be presented in the right way, the products were appropriate for it, and so on and so forth. But we then worked on this recycled nylon Lycra swimwear range, and I think we launched that in 2014 at the Long Beach show in California. And that was, for us, it kind of made total sense that we had divers volunteering their time to go out and remove nets from wrecks and reefs. We had the recycling of that net into a nylon yarn that could then be knitted into a fabric, made into a product that we could then send, in effect, sell back to the divers that helped to get it out. And it was a kind of, it seemed a bit of a closed loop, and such an exciting opportunity to do something that kind of helped to drive that process, that we thought we really have to do this. And so we did. We launched this range of swimwear, which was great. It was very, very well received. And then, of course, we thought, well, hang on, we're doing this in order to remove plastic from the ocean, in the form of fishing net. We can't sell this swimwear in a plastic bag. That just goes completely against the grain. So we then invested in cardboard packaging, and it was very neat and very nice, but inevitably you end up shipping quite a lot of air in cardboard boxes. And so that was a challenge. And we then found an alternative. Well, we found the cassava, so plant starch bags that looked and felt much more like a plastic bag, but were made from the cassava root vegetable. So it was completely organic and dissolvable in water. Jim had taken this totally to heart, but they were dissolvable in water. And,
you build suits out of it, yeah.
Well, he would show how dissolvable it was by often. I think I've witnessed him doing it a few times, where he would pour some warm water on it, stir it in the cup, get this kind of mildly green solution, and drink it, and just say, "There you go. That's that's proof of the fact that it was I don't know how much proof it was, but at least he was willing to drink the dissolved, cassava starch bag, and that was a quite a good solution. But unfortunately, one of the things that cassava, for anybody who's interested in using cassava bags, is certainly at the time, and maybe that they've improved slightly, but who knows, that cold, they don't like extreme cold, and they become brittle. So that was another little challenge we had with our swimwear, that if it spent any length of time in a really cold environment, the bags would crack. And so, all these things were challenges, you might say, to try and achieve this, non-plastic product. But there was just so many little things that crop up, that you don't think, the bag is fine in most temperatures in the UK, but in North America, when it was in transit, from Maine to, I don't know, even, if it stayed a night in the van in Maine, before being shipped across to California, the damage was done. People in California were opening up the swimwear in shops, and of course all the bags were almost disintegrating.
So you've extended all of this into actual dye product as well, haven't you? The recycling now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's been let's say that was the initial start, and we have tried very hard to use as much recycled material as we can to eliminate single-use plastic from our products and packaging. That was a huge endeavor. Mission 2020 was something that we set ourselves to, eliminate all single-use plastic packaging from all of our product range.
Right.
Which we just missed, but we all, basically pandemic put a little bit of a spanner in the works. But it was a bit later in 2020 that we then actually achieved that. So we achieved the eliminating single-use plastic.
I was quite amazed. I saw a press release just recently about the fins that you're producing. Something like 100 plus plastic bottles.
Yeah.
So you're using over 100 plastic bottles to make a pair of fins, which is a wonderful sort of thing to do in terms of recycling so much product.
Totally. I mean, I think it might even be, is it 120 or 150? I can't remember. It's a lot. And I suppose it depends on the size of the fin. But obviously a fin is a hefty product. There's a lot of weight and a lot of volume in it.
Yeah.
And the fin is 97% recycled. The thermoplastic rubber solution that's used around the foot pocket is also recycled, but that's recycled from leftovers from previous moldings and things, perhaps not necessarily fins, but any other moldings using that kind of material. And then the stiff parts of the plastic are used from are recycled from post-consumer, plastic bottles.
This is where both you and Jim have really become sort of ambassadors for recycling products.
Well, that's nice of you to say, but it's certainly been a quest, I think, and it's like one of these things where once you've decided this is the direction you want to take, then you've got to go for it with complete commitment. The moment for us was having made the swimwear and having had a packet to put it in that wasn't plastic, and kind of happily patting ourselves on the back for doing a great job. And then we looked at the whole warehouse and go, what about all of this? And so that was the whole thing about removing the plastic from that packaging, but then the product itself. And so it's just been it's not something you can flick the switch and become, do everything recycled overnight. Especially, well, I think in any kind of business, but we've got so many different products, so many different types of fabric we're using, so many components really, that trying to make all of that from recycled material in a short space of time is just a massive challenge. And so it's an ongoing process. We realize we've got more work to do, but we are committed to using recycled materials as much as we can.
You're sharing this knowledge with others through, you're doing and have done an awful lot of talks, the United Nations one, for example.
Yeah, that was really, quite an exciting opportunity. And again, it was about the commercialization, you might say, of being able to use recycled materials and make it an effective business, and integrate that into your, in fact, your product range. And part of the thrust of my talk was about the fact that, unless we can get the commercial engine running and driving these processes forwards, the recycling process, the create a market for the recycled product at the end, then there's only so much, in effect, charitable work that can be done. We need to get this commercial engine behind it to drive it forwards, so that the people who are gathering, discarded fishing nets and getting them off wrecks and reefs, or collecting plastic bottles and all of that kind of stuff, there's got to be an end where there's a commercial viability in the amount of effort and expense in recycling those products. So that was very much, I suppose, what I felt was our contribution, you might say, by adopting the recycled materials and using them was going to help to keep that ambition going, by creating a commercial approach, you might say.
Yeah.
And then it's just now when we design any of the products, we start with that premise of like, how can we make this product, performance is obviously always absolutely number one, but how can we achieve that performance and also minimize our impact on the environment? We're not saying we can eradicate it. We try and do our best to use recycled materials, processes in which, sometimes to do with waterproofing, the waterproofing of a fabric, you can use methods now that don't have such a toxic chemical runoff and chlorine and so on in the process. So the waterproofing is achieved by using more sort of natural chemical organic compound as opposed to, so there's things like that we consider. Trying to make products that are more easy to recycle at the end of life. That is really hard at the moment, really, really hard. It sounds simple, but it really isn't. As soon as you start mixing materials into a product, the recyclability at the end of life is often challenging. But there's so much more. We're working with our suppliers of these products or of these materials. That's a big emphasis, is developing technology and the ability to recycle product at the end of its life effectively, which can be achieved quite well with certain things at the moment. But that's, again, still part of our conversation when we're creating a new product, is trying to think about its end of life situation as well.
What product still gives you the most satisfaction, having introduced it to the market?
Oh gosh, that's quite a tough one. But the one that came to mind was the Arctic undersuit. It was quite an early product. I mean, that, I suppose, just the fact that it is, I think, a very, very popular undersuit that's now pretty much, well, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of divers use it, and it was an early product, but it's stood the test of time, really. So that one is a I don't know, it comes up as a significant product, I suppose, in our history.
Yeah.
But in some respects, I mean, it's very difficult to have a favorite. I think the process of designing something that then people appreciate or enjoy or feel that they're deriving some sort of benefit from using it is a buzz every time. It's like if you created something and you put it out there and the consumers say, wow, this is great, I love wearing this, or I love using this, and it makes me happier when I'm diving, or it makes me more comfortable when I'm diving, then that is a huge positive kind of feeling and a buzz. I get definitely get Jim and I, I'm sure, both get a real buzz from that. And we've obviously got some new products coming through that we're excited about. Just recently, as you say, the fins and the masks, that was a whole new development for us in terms of going into the hardware, you might say, as opposed to garments and fabrics. So that's been really exciting, and obviously it's given us a great deal of satisfaction and pleasure to actually take this step, and it's been fabulously well received.
I was just because we're getting sort of close to the end, but Ocean Positive, you really do have some wonderful aims there in terms of reducing your carbon footprint. It's just a wonderful sort of concept for the future, isn't it?
Yeah, we were very, we thought long and hard about all of those ambitions, because what we didn't want to do was set either completely unrealistic targets that sounded great. And as a company, there's been a lot of companies recently have, publicized the targets that they're aiming to achieve by 2030 and so on. And some of them are very, very ambitious, and we try very hard to be ambitious and yet also realistic, and have in effect an authenticity about what we're trying to achieve, and in effect working together. I think that working together with our customers, working together with other members of the dive community, other brands. I mean, I think we really believe that in order for us to have the greatest impact that we need to have on the planet, is that we really have to we need to collaborate as an entire community, and whatever that community is, whether that's the dive community or the broader community or the global community, we do need to work together and support each other in trying to achieve these kind of ambitions. So yeah, we wanted to have these different threads of activity and things that we could do differently in different ways in order to have a positive impact and reducing our environmental impact. And that also, part of that might be an education stream, you might say, of how what can we do to further people's understanding of product choice, what they can do with the product end of life, again, disposing of things and making positive choices, you might say. So yeah, there's so many areas in which we can all kind of think about things and how we can do things differently, that it may seem a small thing as an individual, but as many thousands, millions of individuals make that small change, then obviously the combined effect is significant. And I do feel that when we start talking about environmental challenges and the change that's needed, it can almost be viewed as that's such a big change needed that it's almost beyond what we can comprehend. But I think it's a bit like us when we started with our on our recycling or using recycled materials. It's like it's small steps, and one step at a time. We can't leap from here to the ultimate goal in one big giant leap. We need to take these little steps, and we all make little changes, and these little changes lead on to something else, and then we gradually work towards a greater, bigger change. Obviously we haven't got that much time to do it. We can't hang about because things are getting worse by the day, by the week. But I feel as a problem, we need to break it down and get some small wins and work towards achieving the big win, shall we say.
And how do you think you'd go now if you were sent back in time into that quarry in Cambridgeshire? And how much happier would you have been? And how many more instructors would have been signed up?
In terms of, sorry.
Well, just the warmth, the warm garments that you produce.
Okay. Yeah. I'd have been way happier for sure that week. Yeah, if I'd been a bit warmer. It was yeah. And I suppose that gives me some satisfaction to think that over the years between Jim and I, and obviously all of our team, which is it's not just Jim and I, but obviously any stretched imagination. Yeah. And we got fabulous team and really committed people who work for Fourth Element.
You've got offices all over the world now, haven't you?
We've got a few. Yeah, we've got one in Australia, and we have one in the USA as that kind of direct offices, and then we've got some significant distributors in the likes of Singapore and various places. But we're continuing to work towards I suppose it's that kind of getting you increasing the size of your network as best you can, and growing the brand, and that's obviously part of the whole thing. But
Well,
if we can do that in a more sustainable way, then that, it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. Paul, we've come to the end of our time, I'm advised, but it was absolutely lovely catching up with you. So, Cushy, are you there?
He is here.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, guys. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, both Paul and David, for your time today. It was an exceptionally amazing sharing. And I really hope the borders open up soon. So I look forward to meeting both of you at the 8X show happening in June this year.
Great.
Yeah, so
Excellent.
For our viewers, if you guys have any questions, don't forget to drop them in the comments and we'll get back to you. And our next session happening shortly on dive etiquettes with Claudio Di Manio. And anyways, thank you guys so much once again and see you soon.
Thank you, Cushy. Paul,
Bye, guys.
That was lovely to meet you. I shall be in touch.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Cushy. And thanks, David. It's a pleasure to have a chat with you, almost a fireside chat at
well, it almost
here.
was. And
Almost.
give my regards to the family. It's
I will. All of them.
all of them. Paul, you take care. See you.
Great. Thanks very much, David. Cheers.
Bye,
Thank
Cushy.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.